There we are, Chair. You can make a start.
There we are then. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Community Safety and Public Protection Scrutiny Subcommittee on this lovely Friday morning, the 1st of October 2021, remotely, obviously, through Microsoft Teams. Just to make you all aware, today's meeting will be recorded. Can I also welcome any members of the public and press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not speak or participate? Can I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting also? And can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated, namely, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. So do you wish to ask a question or make a comment? Can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand? I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting, and please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you are referring to? And I will take you to the first item on the agenda today, and that's to do the roll call. I am Councillor Steve Hunt, and I am here. I will now ask Charlotte, the Democratic Service Officer, to take the roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll mark yourself as present. And if I can move to Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Dean Causey.
Present, thanks, Charlotte.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Present, thanks, Charlotte.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Sean Pacey.
Present.
We've had apologies, Chair, from Councillor Cypher Hammond and apologies from Councillor Nigel Hunt. Councillor Scott Bamsey? No. And then if I move to Cabinet members, Councillor Leanne Jones?
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Annette Wingrave?
Councillor Wingrave sends her apologies.
And then to officers, Chris Millis?
Present, Charlotte, thanks.
Eleanor Wellington?
She sends her apology, Charlotte.
Claire Jones?
Present.
Thank you. Kerry Morris?
Present, Charlotte.
Mark Thomas?
Present, Charlotte.
Nicola Headon? No. Hugh Jones? I think what we're trying to get him in the... Oh, he might actually be here, sorry.
Yeah, good morning all. Thank you.
There we are, perfect, thank
Morning,
you.
Hugh.
Have I missed anyone at all? No, then Chair, that's the attendance.
Thank you, Charlotte. It was remiss of me not to mention Chloe. Chloe is usually our Democratic Service Officer. She's not very well, and Charlotte, the capable Charlotte, have stepped in this morning. And I'm sure we all wish Chloe the speedy recovery from her illness or whatever. Right, this next item is the Chair's announcement. We have two items on our scrutiny agenda for today's meeting, which includes a presentation of the impact of COVID on food hygiene services and inspections, and the Community Safety and Public Protection Performance Report, which is the first quarter of 2021 to 2022. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Can I ask members for any declarations of interest, please? I see none. I'll move on swiftly on to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which took place on the 9th of July 2021. They're attached on the agenda for approval. They're on pages 5 to 20. Does any member have any comments to make on the accuracy of the minutes, please? I see none. So can I have a proposal and a seconder to say the minutes are a true record, please?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Seconder?
Yeah, second.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. There we are. All in agreement. If you don't put your hand up, I believe you are. Yeah, that's fine. Item 5, as you'll be aware, there was a new item on the agenda these days. It's an officer's announcement. It's on our agenda so the officers can provide any brief updates on elements of their work. So does any officer at this point want to raise any updates to members on today's agenda, please? No, it's self-explanatory. Thank you. So moving swiftly on to item 6, which is the impact of COVID on food hygiene services and inspection. Before I go into that, who's raised their hands? Charlotte? Or Kerry? Kerry?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, do they come to you before I introduce the item?
No, all I was going to say, Chair, is I was going to sort of briefly say a few words before handing over to Mark and Hugh. So I'll wait for your direction, Chair.
There we are. Yeah, I come to you then. Right. The reporting officers are Kerry Morris, Mark Thomas, and Hugh Jones. They will be providing a presentation. Just to make members aware, the report is for information and for noting. But I'll move swiftly to Kerry first, and then he can introduce his colleagues and officers. Over to you, Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly from me then, as I said, the purpose of this morning is to give members an overview of the impact that the COVID pandemic has had, specifically on the food hygiene service. Members, will of course be aware that the wider Environmental Health and Trading Standards Service has and will continue to do so, be at the forefront of the Council's response to COVID. This has inevitably sort of had a significant impact, of course, on how we're able to deploy and utilise our staff resources. I've likened it previously sort of to moving chess pieces around to deal with the most pressing sort of issues and priorities. But I thought it was a good opportunity for me to state, Chair, from a personal perspective, I can't speak highly enough of the staff, as over the duration they've been incredibly flexible and shown a great deal of commitment and resilience to get the work done, despite the pressures that have come their way. But unfortunately, we're 18 months in and we still very much find ourselves in response mode. We're certainly not out of the woods just yet. So as I said, the aim of today is to perhaps bring members up to speed in terms of where we've been, what's perhaps ahead of us in terms of dealing with the backlog of work as we move towards recovery. In terms of the presentation, Chair, Mark and Hugh are going to do a bit of a double act this morning, and they'll take you through a few slides, but it'll broadly focus on the purpose, the structure and functions of the Food and Health Protection team, the effect that COVID has had on the team, not least because of the establishment of TTP service, and also the need to prioritise support for the care homes, but also, as I say, the backlog of work and what's ahead of us as we move forward. We will make the presentation available for members, Chair, so we can circulate that via Charlotte following the session today. And at the end, between the three of us, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions or queries that members may have. So on that basis, I'll perhaps now hand across to Mark, who will cover the first few slides. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Mark, before I bring you in, the Deputy Leader's got a hand up. Can I'll go to her first, if that's all right?
It's just sure. Thank you, Chair. It's just to concur really with what Kerry's just said about the service and about the staff and about what they faced, and it's something that we've spoken about for the last couple of weeks in the members panel as well with colleagues, of how our staff have been resilient and have delivered services where they've been pushed, pulled and stretched. So it's just to say I appreciate the work really. I meet with Kerry and Mark on a regular basis and get regular updates. So it's just to concur really what Kerry's just said. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. And I'm sure this committee and all members across the county borough would echo those thoughts, given the circumstances and how hard they have worked. So I have no doubt that we all agree with the comments you've made and Kerry's comments. So over to you then, Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair, and make sure the sort of kind comments that are passed on to the teams, it is appreciated. I'll share the presentation, if you can bear with me 1 minute. I say there's a bit of a double act between me and Hugh. What I wanted to do is just bring everyone up to speed and aware of the sort of structure of the service and the functions that we do sort of carry out. Perhaps some of them pre-COVID weren't as recognised as they are now, certainly on the communicable disease sort of aspect. So if you could let me know when the presentation is up, I can start then.
Yes, it's there, Mark. Any member not seeing it? No, that's fine. Carry on, Mark.
Great. I wanted to give an overview of the Food and Health Protection team. Now the Food and Health Protection team has been the team that's been sort of drawn into the contact tracing function that's been put onto the authority. Whereas pre-COVID, the purpose of the team was really to ensure that sort of food safety from the sort of primary producer through to the farm, manufacturing, supply, retail, and catering businesses, that the food was safe and got to the ultimate consumer in that safe condition. So it's the farm to fork principle, and the service really sort of aims to sort of maintain a safe and healthy environment and encourage good practices throughout the sort of businesses. It's our job in a way is to ensure that resources are targeted where they're most effective and address areas of the highest risk, and that's the sort of overarching aim of the team. And that's something where the management, myself, Kerry and Hugh sort of meet regularly, and we produce a delivery plan and enforcement review sort of annually to sort of consider all aspects of that to ensure that in the ever-changing world that we get it right and we target things correctly. So the food safety sort of element is really directed through a framework agreement we have with the Food Standard Agency, like all other authorities, certainly in Wales, and that agreement goes back to sort of 2010, and that really directs what structure authorities put in place and the functions down to sort of food alerts, interventions of businesses and the frequency of those interventions and the type, policies and procedures that we need to put in place, and the training and competency of officers. So that really is what we're audited against when the Food Standards Agency do audits of authorities to ensure that food safety throughout Wales is up to standard and consistent. Now, another role of the team is communicable disease control. Now, because of the high focus of food safety, it is felt that perhaps pre-COVID, this element of work wasn't as recognised as it is now. The officers in the team have always undertaken sort of communicable disease control through a system called Tarian, whereby we get notifications of Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, and other communicable diseases, whereby officers then carry out sort of investigations, including contact tracing. So contact tracing isn't a new concept, and it is that concept and expertise that the team have which has led to the recognition of environmental health officers being perhaps at the forefront and involved within the COVID response. So that was the link there with the environmental health officers and the Food and Health Protection team. Now, an overview and structure of the team, having now sort of gone through the role and functions of the team, I'm not aware, or I want to make everyone aware that it is a small team, and the FTE, the full-time equivalence of the team in its entirety, is only 11.5 officers. Now that would include Hugh as a team leader and a senior environmental health officer as well. Pre-COVID, we did move resources around, and pre-COVID, we seconded one of those enforcement officers to the general environmental health team because the pressure was there. So coming into COVID, it's a relatively small team to deal with all these functions. And when sort of contact tracing came about, when we had to sort of assist with that or manage that. Obviously, that team was quite severely affected. So, moving on to the effect of COVID and the food and health protection team. Back in June 2020, guidance came from sort of Welsh Government to all authorities on how the contact tracing structure should look and who should be involved in that structure. Because of the expertise of environmental health officers within the food and health protection team, 4.5 FTEs from that team were put into the regional TTP structure, which was obviously half the team. It really dealt with sort of care home work, outbreaks and closed cell work, whereby there's a local TTP for contact tracing as well, which had a slightly different role, but they both work very closely together. But obviously, I'm trying to paint a picture of how we came to the position we are in at the moment and where resources are sort of deployed between the food and health protection team, which Hugh is the team leader of, and regional contact tracing. The Food Standards Agency obviously recognised the issues local authorities were having and the effect it was also having on the inspection regime and the framework agreement and what could and couldn't be done. So proactive inspections were sort of suspended. Obviously, we were following guidance from the FSA, them being the competent authority in Wales. However, we would respond to sort of certain reactive tasks, such as sort of food poisoning outbreaks, food controls and import and export purposes, approved premises, and sort of the fishing and shellfish industry. Obviously, this was sort of coinciding with Brexit and the pressures of Brexit as well to try and keep some sort of trade going. So the staff resource issues we've come across and are still coming across is the flexibility and the challenges of providing a contact tracing team with those competencies whilst responding to these reactive tasks and considering recovery where we can. Because of as we're all aware, the nature of this pandemic, it comes in sort of peaks and troughs, and 1 minute we seem to be coming into recovery, whereas the next minute we're coming out of it and numbers are going up again. So we have had to be very flexible, and it's had an effect on the service. But as managers, we are mindful of the stresses that does put on officers, having sort of constant change and redeployment, but we obviously try to manage that as best we can. I think we've been very successful in our recruitment of agency staff and temporary staff in Neath Talbot. I think because of our structure, we do not dwell on things, and we're able to sort of make decisions quite quickly and perhaps get ahead of the curve sometimes. And we have some excellent agency environmental health officers and temporary environmental health officers involved within the regional TTP team and to assist the food and health protection team. There are challenges in that. One obviously being that they are temporary and they are sort of in this climate in high demand. So if permanent posts come up, we have seen 1 or 2 being lost to that, and where sort of rates of pay are higher, we've also seen that as well. And without any reassurance of grant aid from Welsh Government in any long term, then as the funding comes to an end, we do see more discussions between the temporary and agency staff, and obviously they're going to look for the next paycheck somewhere else. Other pressures we found is there's been a recruitment drive in Public Health Wales, which have included a look for environmental health officers, and we have lost a very good environmental health officer to Public Health Wales as part of that recruitment. There's an identified national shortage of environmental health and training standards officers throughout Wales and the country, and again, we in Neath Talbot have made very good links with Cardiff Met University to try and pull in the next crop of environmental health officers early and build those bridges and communication links with the university, so that not only can we address things in the short term, but we're also planning for the medium and long term through that training as well. And life doesn't stop. At the moment we have a qualified environmental health officer on maternity leave, and our current temporary senior environmental health officer within the Food and Health Protection team is due to go off on maternity in December. So these are all sort of challenges that as managers we've got to consider to keep the service running as best we can. But personally, I think we're not in a bad place, and we're certainly doing a lot further forward than other authorities. But at this point, I'd like to pass you over to Hugh, who can sort of put more detail into it and give a bit of a timeline on the challenges him and his team have faced sort of going forward. So if I can pass over to Hugh, thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and we've got the slides to continue with. So, yeah, good morning. My name is Hugh Jones. I'm the team leader, and I wanted to take you through a review of where we've been, what we faced, and where we're at and where we're going to. So I've got a few slides to cover it sort of quarter by quarter, looking back at effectively from Q4 of 2019, when lockdown was announced by the Prime Minister. In March that time, we were looking at a yearly inspection of 309 premises, and we were up to 299 of those. We had a final 10 to go, and obviously the lockdown was announced, and those 10 inspections were paused at that point, and gave us a PI outturn of 97%. Although I guess if we'd have had the last few days of March to finish the remainder, we would have been at 100% for the high-risk premise inspections, which is one of our PIs. Obviously at that time then everything was put on pause. The whole emphasis was on reducing footfall at businesses, and everyone was asked to work from home. That rolled us into Q1 of 2020. Obviously COVID was rising. New guidance came out from the Food Standards Agency. Local authorities were invited to provide input into that. And obviously the FSA and other partners recognised the importance of COVID and the COVID response, and put in local public health needs first. Some of it included a lot of officers from lots of local authorities being tasked with new jobs, particularly COVID related, although some were required to continue to provide the service of food hygiene, especially in regard to anything which was of public health significant risk. At that time, the need to stay out of businesses, just so that we could understand what the routes of transmission were and what the risks in reality were, made most of the Food and Health Protection team focus on support within the care homes. So this was to increase COVID preparedness, such as confirming the availability and use of PPE, changing stations, waste control, cohorting or grouping of residents, and barrier nursing, and also such things as cleaning and disinfection, social distancing and car sharing. So a lot of advice was being given out, and a lot of advice was changing, and obviously the officers had to keep themselves up to date, as well as the service providers.
Chair, Chair, sorry, can I just come in briefly? I can see Councillor Nigel Hunt has joined the meeting, but can we just confirm that he hasn't got any declarations just for the purpose of a public meeting?
Yeah, you're quite right. I just noticed that myself. So Nigel, have you got any declarations on the items that we scrutinising this morning, please?
Thank you, Charlotte. No, Chair, I don't have any declarations.
There we are, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sorry about that, Hugh. Back over to you then, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. So, yeah, just running by where we've been, that in the contact with the care home providers, we were in great dialogue with them. Obviously, they were unsure of what they needed to do. Our officers were coaching them through what was needed, where they could get PPE supplies from, answering their queries about staffing and cohorting of people and what PPE to wear under what circumstances and how to change it. So that went on pretty much all the way through the COVID response. And on top of that, as if life wasn't busy enough, the Welsh Government brought out the coronavirus restriction regulations. So that then required us to give advice to businesses on what was permitted to trade and under what circumstances. That takes us into effectively Q2, where in the height of the first original lockdown, there was the establishment of the regional and local track, trace and protect schemes. So Public Health Wales and Welsh Government divide the standard operating protocols, and we had to create a lot of new teams quite quickly based on the skills, as Mark has alluded to, within the environmental health team and what the food and health protection team had previously done. We were centred to that. The demands were expanding and so were the pressures. The regional test, trace and protect team dealt with the more complex cases and providing a lot of information about the grey areas and what risks were and what restrictions were in place as well. As part of that, most of the team were dealing with care homes on the project to prioritise advice on the COVID controls required, as well as new businesses which were then starting up, as they were one of the few industry sectors which are allowed to operate. So we did see quite a spike in lots of home caterers starting up and people wanting to supply food from any number of locations. So we did get some complaints from members of the public. We also got them from existing businesses complaining about lack of standards or lack of fairness or a lack of a level playing field. And they were a lot of the time just concerned about their own trade and how it was being affected, and whether more people moving in and stories in the national press were to be believed. But also an interpretation of the lockdown rules, which types of premises were allowed to trade and under what circumstances, and again, even what products were able to be traded and sold. So there was a lot of advice, and in the end, everything was evolving and ended up involving colleagues from across the wider service, particularly the trading standards and the general environmental health teams, in regard to the COVID restriction regs, but also our spheres went to deal with other queries from Public Health Wales and liaising with social services colleagues, particularly adult services over the care homes. After that, then we took over some of the incident responses within care homes and closed settings. So that was a shared undertaking by the Food and Health Protection team and the newly created regional TTP team. And then towards the end of that quarter, we saw the slight relaxation of the lockdown rules. Again, that created a surge in food businesses wanting advice, and particularly on how to open, whether home deliveries were available, and we might remember the Eat Out to Help Out scheme as well. Q3 obviously got even busier. The care homes within Neath, Talbot and across most of Wales and the UK ended up on red alert status. Many of them had severe outbreaks, and there was an impact of loss of life, and that took a big toll on the people providing the care as well as the people within the care homes, and it did rub off on the officers who were shouldering that burden and carrying people through what they needed to do, as well as empathising with the losses and the difficulties, not just of the residents' welfare, but also of the staff of the care homes, who themselves had obviously personal impacts, and that could impact further and wider on their families. And there's lots of concerns which, as I say, did end up rubbing off on the officers. So it was quite a burden, and it did seem quite desperate at times. Obviously, not many food hygiene inspections were being undertaken at that time. We were juggling responses on triage principles, obviously trying to understand which jobs we could achieve, in particular in relation to anything which was classed as, with the Food Standards Agency, a risk of public health significance. And then the email was helpful from the Chief Exec to explain that pressures were unprecedented, and indeed some services would be delayed. Our colleagues who'd been seconded into the regional TTP team were providing a 7-day service. Obviously, this was over and above the contracted hours with the council, and it was done on a goodwill basis. And that goodwill has seen them stay in regional TTP right to this moment. So it's been a huge effort on behalf of the whole team, and in particular the officers themselves have really dug deep to continue with that provision of service. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to keep providing every service as thoroughly as we would like under such extreme pressures. So we had to be light of our feet and work out which services we would be able to provide and at what threshold points we would be able to provide them. So we did change around certain things that we were traditionally providing. We used and pulled in a lot more people to help assist fill the gaps, particularly asking admin team colleagues to do things on behalf of officers and set up new systems to make certain areas that they could achieve be more productive. So that's been a positive as well, because that's something which has been maintained all the way through, and we've rolled that into our new way of working. Senior officers from in the Food and Health Protection team also had to run and operate the incident management teams. These were particularly set up when a care home had a severe outbreak, and it was liaising with Public Health Wales colleagues, reporting back to Welsh Government, and obviously dealing with the service providers and social services colleagues to keep everyone aware of what was happening, what needed to happen next, and how to be as prepared and in a good as place as possible for recovery. There were some challenges with that, but I guess we've managed it as best we can given the circumstances and the level of resource we had. So after Christmas, I think there was a sigh of relief in the development of the vaccine just before Christmas, and then obviously the bit wider rollout occurring alleviated some of the anxieties and pressures that were seen before Christmas. Outbreaks in care homes still continued, and that was unfortunate, and it was in need of having an urgent rollout of the vaccine. We were fortunate in some parts of the borough getting supplies of vaccines early, and they were obviously sent to the care homes in the first instance and over 80s, and then worked down through the age groups as quickly as possible. Again, a huge effort on behalf of the GP surgeries who went out into the care homes to provide them, as well as the health board setting up the field centres for vaccine for the rest of the population, and obviously prioritising the care home workers as part of that. So during February, March, obviously the wider rollout of the vaccines gave more hope, and that was an encouragement to the whole care sector, as well as ourselves as officers. There did seem to be some light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, there wasn't much time to stop, so we had to then start devising recovery plans. We had some officers which we could release from the care homes project. That was the majority of the food hygiene inspection officers that we've got back in the team doing food hygiene inspections currently. Although, as Mark has mentioned, RTTP, regional TTP, track, trace and protect still continues, and they've got approximately 50% of the team still assigned to that project. The remainder of the officers were able to re-engage with new businesses in particular. They were obviously quite a number set up during lockdown, and whilst they were able to operate, all they'd been able to get from us was email advice, and this was the first time to be able to phone them and give and undertake effectively a telephone audit. That was helpful in allowing us then to focus on which ones would be prioritised for inspection, and then inspections started to resume, and effectively the PI for the outturn of that year was low. Obviously it was 14%. We managed to achieve 51 inspections out of a projected list, which would ordinarily have been the case of 368. So that does give us a large backlog, obviously, coming into this year and onwards. So Q1 for 2021, the recovery plan from the FSA was issued, and there's been subsequent versions of that, with the latest one being on the 26th of June, which is looking for the next 18 months ahead. Obviously, alert levels for the country have dropped down to 0, and they went through the stages of dropping, and as more and more things were opening up, returning footfall was within most sectors, and eventually even the hospitality sector. We still have, again, 50% of the team still on regional TTP duties, and they are supplemented, as Mark's mentioned, with agency staff. The half a team doing it would never have been enough all the way through the COVID pandemic, and they're still heavily reliant on external contractors. We have devised our response to the FSA's blueprint for recovery, and it was also necessary for our officers during that time to effectively recover themselves. They'd been working hard throughout the pandemic, and a lot of them had put off their leave, and they were encouraged to book or take some leave early on this year and through the summer. So that brings us pretty much up to date where we currently are at the moment. So obviously, Q2 main concern for us at the moment is the backlogs. Everything that was paused from 2021 still not done. We can see there that does show we've got, at least we were able to achieve our highest risk category band of premises to be undertaken. That was our category A's. However, category B's, we have got a few remaining, which was a carryover of 16. And in the category C, the carryover is substantially larger at 273. It doesn't, on this slide, take into account the lower risk premises in category D's and E's, for which there's a different way of dealing with things, and they don't form part of the national PI. However, when you add the backlog from last year and superimpose that on the expectations for this year, as the cumulative proactive inspections that fall due ordinarily under the codes of practice, we're looking at, obviously, we do only have a small number of category A premises. Most of ours are in categories C, D and E, but the important ones of A, B and C are illustrated there. A big chunk of work, however, has come from new businesses starting up last year, and those are the priority for us to catch up with this year. That's illustrated in the FSA blueprint for recovery, and it's because they wouldn't have had any inspections whatsoever, so nobody really knows what's going on inside those food businesses until we get there. So looking ahead, There is a caveat that obviously, as Kerry has mentioned, we're not out of this yet, and we're acutely aware of that when we're doing our planning and forward thinking. So the regional TTP team will still be in existence. It'll still have the lead officers from Environmental Health, Food and Health Protection team, and they are very reliant on the whole of the contingent from the Food and Health Protection team, but primarily is led by the senior EHO there, Rebecca Davis. We are expecting, obviously, peak workloads still to be ahead of us. The COVID infection rates continue to rise, and that can only be expected to get worse as winter approaches. We still prioritise the support to care homes, and that is one of the major parts of the work of the regional TTP team. Currently, the standard operating procedures may have changed and been updated periodically through the whole of the pandemic, but they certainly are still a priority for ourselves as well as Welsh Government. On Welsh Government, they have provided funding for the regional TTP team as well as the local TTP team. And Mark said earlier, the difference being that the local TTP team mainly focused on doing tracing of contacts, whereas the regional TTP team mainly deal with outbreaks and managing recovery. We are awaiting a future roadmap to see what happens in their mind from April the 1st onwards. The funding, as I say, currently goes to the end of March 2022. On the back of that, food hygiene, the part of the team which is now refocused on doing food hygiene inspections, they are out there doing inspections, most notably at new food businesses, and the other categories which are on a time scale set by the Food Standards Agency, starting with category A and working down. That goes alongside lots of local reactive work which is acknowledged within the plan, and anything which is of public health significance again is to be prioritised under the plan for local authority response work. So we've got a proactive element as well as a substantial reactive workload element. We are attempting recruitment of agency staff. There is funding which can be offset from obviously some of the officers being seconded to the regional TTP team, and whilst that funding is there till the 31st of March, we are always on the lookout for locum staff to come in and provide some backfill capacity. And as Mark had mentioned earlier, we have been successful in both teams to some extent, although there is a national shortage. So we would still have more capacity to take people on, but they aren't simply available, unfortunately. The current projection, as I see it, is that we can do approximately just over the 200 mark of inspections by the 31st of March. Mostly, again, that will be the new businesses and the higher risk premises, or anything which provides us with intelligence or complaints about food hygiene standards. So it does give a level of inspection, perhaps not into the 300 to 500 range that we were able to deliver on prior to COVID. But given that we're working with half a team and some newly expected locum support is hopefully coming to us before Christmas, then that's the projection as we sit here today. So the continuation of where we are going, the recovery plan. Jumped one, sorry about that. The priorities have been set by the FSA. Mainly to get back on track with some proactive inspections, particularly to inspect and rate all new businesses, undertake the inspections of category A premises by no later than the 31st of March 2022, and then there are milestones then scheduled in after that. So the category Bs by no later than the 30th of June 2022. Category C's 30th of September 2022. Those which are not broadly compliant would be into that category, as opposed to being able to do them all by that date. there is some flexibility on the ones. So the ones which are classed as not broadly compliant are the worst performing ones. They're typically your premises which have got food hygiene ratings of 0, 1 or 2. Whereas the broadly compliant premises are the ones which are recognised as having food hygiene ratings of 3, 4 or 5. And again, according to the FSA blueprint, which has been worked up with local authority input, then the categories continue to be brought back online as soon as possible. And that category D premises, which are not broadly compliant, will be fitted in after the Cs, and then returning to the Cs which are broadly compliant. So everything should be back on track in the first ABC category by the 31st of March 2023. There's no expectation currently for the lower risks, the category E's at all. They're seen as something that local discretion will devise a plan for rather than it being mandated within the FSA. And similarly, the broadly compliant category D premises, there's no expectation currently on when those will be factored in. The underlying information from the FSA is that they'd expect local authorities to be able to get fully compliant with the code of practice as soon as reasonably practicable given local circumstances. So they've got some headlines and they've got some flexibility built in, and there are some big numbers in those lower categories to juggle, and so they'd expect a lot of these premises to be done as soon as resources permit. So they'd see these deadlines as being more of a deadline than a sort of target. You need to be achieving well above this. So apart from the proactive inspections, there is a lot of reactive work which needs to be scheduled in and is part of the plan as well. So to continue to take enforcement action which is proportionate to risk based on local enforcement policy, and to include prosecutions where deemed appropriate, to investigate incidents of food poisoning or foodborne disease, to continue to undertake inspections on imported foods and any exports, to monitor any approved premises, and to maintain the integrity of the statutory food hygiene rating scheme, as well as to investigate complaints from the public which might be of public health significance or which contravene food hygiene law. The plan is silent on providing advice or supporting businesses. These are discretionary and again based on available resources, but we see that there's a huge demand for that locally to facilitate a smooth start-up of a business, gives it more chance of being successful, but it also gives it more chance of being compliant from day one, and providing less problems for enforcement officers to take later on down. If they start off on a good footing, then that's a good outcome for themselves. They'll get a good food hygiene rating. It's good for the public because they'll have confidence and obviously an assurance of the food that they're buying and the standards behind the scenes. And it's good eventually for enforcement undertakings, so that enforcement wouldn't necessarily be expected because they will have already achieved very good standards and know what is the expected standard to achieve. So I think that gives a quick round off really of what I wanted to cover for where we've been, what challenges and pressures we've faced, what we're currently doing about the carry forward of backlogs, how that links with the Food Standards Agency expectations and that of other local authorities throughout Wales and the rest of the UK. And I guess it's just a sort of opportunity now for me to make a few reflections and conclude. I think it's been very important to recognise the dedication of the staff that we've got. All of them have got a can-do approach, and we've been through some unprecedented pressures, and they've maintained a huge level of service and a huge commitment as well. We are waiting to see what the extent of the winter COVID peaks are, and we are waiting to see what the Welsh Government plan for the TTP services, both regional and local level, after the 31st of March 2022. We need to know what funding is coming, what staffing will be required, and whether there would be some possibility or hopeful return of the food hygiene officers to bring the food hygiene team to full strength. Throughout the pandemic, I think there's a couple of other interesting issues. Neath Talbot continues to be a very good place to work. That's the feedback I'm getting from the officers, and I know it myself, in that the way that we've been able to get working from home, be supported to be productive from working from home and from other locations, doing our agile working and what will become hybrid working, are all seen to link with very progressive HR policies. And yet, again, it brings a year of looking forward to us changing. Flexing is the new word for the challenges ahead. And I guess that concludes my presentation, and be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh, and for that enlightening impact of COVID on the food hygiene services and inspections. Thorough presentation and information there. I thank you very much for that. Kerry, before I go to questions from members, is there anything you would like to add before I do that?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. The only thing I would perhaps add, and it's to maybe pick up a point that Hugh sort of touched on in his last slide, and that's effectively that we are waiting to see what Welsh Government's expectations are in terms of the TTP service, particularly going forward. The challenge we've had over quite some time now is the Welsh Government, in their wisdom, have just effectively applied six-month funding windows in effect. Now the funding is obviously welcome, so we're certainly not complaining about that. But what the Welsh Government are perhaps failing to see and grasp is, we can't continue to sort of deploy our resources on a sort of a 6-month funding cycle. So we've made those points abundantly clear that the Welsh Government, I mean, hopefully they're looking at it now at this exact point in time. But what we now need is a longer term vision from the Welsh Government funding and a commitment, much more than just a 6-month window, because they have to recognise that local authorities across Wales are really struggling to deploy their resources. And as Mark touched on right at the start, we've worked wonders in terms of getting staff in, but we're not able at this point to offer them longer term contracts. So as a consequence, we are losing good staff. We are losing, and we're struggling then in terms of that continuity, which is incredibly important going forward. So yeah, it's just to make that, and perhaps to re-emphasise that point to members. We are very much aware of that challenge, and we are very much taking every opportunity at every meeting where Welsh Government officials are there to make that point very strongly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry, and I'm sure all members agree and support those comments, and would do whatever we could do in our capacity to support you in getting the funding you certainly need to do this very important work. So over to members for questions now then, please. Any member like to ask officers questions on this item? Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and yeah, thanks all for the presentation. That was it was really thorough and really interesting actually to sort of get that full picture of the impact, I guess. But one of the specific questions I've got is because coming into this, one of the things I was worried about was that sort of huge backlog which I know was building up in the food inspections sort of regime, and obviously you've addressed in the report, in the presentation, maybe some of the expectations of where we should be at certain milestones. But I guess, do we feel that is achievable? Obviously, there's lots of things we know are risks. Of course, changes in, the pandemic, staff retention, etc. I'm just wondering, are we confident we can sort of hit those FSA expectations, which seem fairly realistic in terms of they're not asking us to get everything done in one go, and they're prioritising high risk, which is great. But do we feel that's achievable?
Kerry, is that you or one of your officers to answer that?
I think he was got his hand up, so no doubt he will come in.
Yeah, I think to answer it quickly, we are fairly confident, but there are caveats, and the caveats are obviously what will happen this winter and what will happen with TTP. As Mark has said, and we have been lucky in being able to recruit a couple of locums to backfill certain spots, and we've just gone and been able to secure a couple more in a part-time capacity, which hopefully, if they come to us before Christmas, I illustrated in the slides that we'd have about 200 odd inspections plus on a good day. The thing which would also hold us back on that is if any of them turned into deep investigations or prosecutions, which might tie up officer resource for a bit longer. But assuming that we're on a fair level playing field, we should be achieving the minimum standard of the FSA, but only because we can get the resilience back from either the TTP team officers returning full-time to us, or the continuation of having the funding and buying in the support from locums. So it's not black, but it is a bit of a grey answer, but fingers crossed, yeah, we should be close to it.
Sean?
Yeah, no, thanks, no, thanks, Hugh, for that. That's quite helpful. I guess one sort of quick follow-up, just for my clarity, and Kerry's mentioned about some of the funding as well. In terms of those sort of locum staff that we're getting in at the moment, is that reliant on Welsh Government funding that's supporting the service, Kerry?
Kerry?
Yes, it is, Councillor Percy. The way the funding is structured, we can both claim funding both for staff that are directly employed to TTP, but also staff that are required to backfill any staff that have been seconded to TTP, so that we are enabled. Yes, so Welsh Government does cover that funding, yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's helpful. But obviously, that sort of explains that knock-on effect of those short funding windows as well on other elements of the service. And I think certainly from my perspective, we'd be interested in, as a committee, or I would be anyway, to be sort of kept in the loop if there's down the line, if we see perhaps issues arising or continuing to arise with that sort of funding structure that might put some of these targets or progress at risk. I think we'd appreciate sort of an update on that to sort of track how it's going, and certainly for us to make a little fuss for Welsh Government if we need to. Because I certainly, for me, I think, keeping up the standard of high risk premises and inspections is really, really important, and something I think the public really, really value as well. And we need the support, don't we, to do that and to keep doing that. So thank you.
Mark, you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think it's a very good point that Councillor Percy just made. Without these proactive inspections, the risk is still out there. The recovery plan that the FSA have put in place is a plan which has been sort of devised to ensure that in the long term, resources can meet the inspections. But until we get to that end point, there is obviously the risk, and it's an educated sort of risk and a plan that that food poisonings could come from any food business. So we do need to put resource into it, which has been sort of touched on quite a lot. Is short-termism really doesn't work, and what we don't want to be is soldiers to fortune in a way, which agency workers sort of are. It's very difficult to get a temporary locum to do 37 hours because they, even though we've got them on the books and we've done all the HR sort of background checks, I think the ones we've got at the moment, the maximum hours we're getting is 20 hours per locum. So even with everything, we're still not getting the full inspection sort of regime we'd get out of a full-time FTE. But as we've touched on, I think we've been very successful in bringing in very good quality locums because of our relationship and our reputation. If we're perfectly honest, what he was touched on.
Thank you, Mark. Sean, you okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other member got a question on this item? I don't see no hands up, but just briefly from myself. Sean covered the question I was going to ask as well, Mark, Hugh, Kerry. You spelled it out quite clearly, and I think a very informative presentation and report where you've identified the risks and where the capacity and resources may lie. Because let's be quite frank and honest, is that if there was an incident that was quite serious, we'll soon be there, front pages of the national press and media, something that we wouldn't want to see. And it would be down not because of the excellent work that you and your team are doing with the capacity and resources you currently have, but it will be down to the lack of resources. As you mentioned, maternity leave. I want to put a message out. I'm sure the committee would agree. You said you take our good wishes back to your team, but I think it really needs to be highlighted that we're concerned of their mental health and other concerns in the capacity of the excellent work they're carrying out. They're going above and beyond their workloads, because I know officers are cross-referencing to work to make sure nothing is missed. So I think you're doing an absolutely tremendous job, but you certainly need support from Welsh Government to get what you need so that we can protect Neath and Talbot as we should. It's not just a matter of doing our best. It's a matter of doing more than our best, but given the resources to carry out that work. So I'm sure we all would agree that I know Kerry sits in these meetings now, deputy leader and leader and chief exec. So I'm sure they're all doing the same thing, but it is important, especially the care homes was highlighted a lot of in your report. And you mentioned the COVID figures have gone up, and Neath Talbot one of the highest in Wales. So good luck with all the continued brilliant work you're doing. And you certainly have our backing, and I'm sure the whole authority's backing for your team. But please, Kerry, Hugh, Mark, get that message across to all your staff from us at this committee as well, please. But thank you. The deputy leader wants to come in on this point as well. Over to you, Leanne.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just to reassure members really that the leadership are doing all they can to get the resources and provide the help and support that they need in environmental health. As I said in the very beginning, they've been pushed to the limits, I think, on some occasions. And mental health and well-being is something that Kerry, Mark and I have discussed all through the pandemic, because I've had my concerns, as you know. Members and all members of staff really have experienced different things, and the support was in place for them, and I know there has been, but it's making sure that the team are okay and we're moving forward and we're not missing anything that is important and can affect our communities. So I can provide you that assurance, members, that I'm fully on board with Kerry and Mark and doing all we can to get the extra resources as well.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. That's very reassuring. Thank you. Okay, this item, I see no other indications. It's for, as I said, is for noting. So we will note this and thank the officers for their presentation. Moving on to item 7, this is the Community Safety and Public Protection Performance Report. It's the first quarter from 2021 to 22. The report starts on pages 21, concludes on pages 28. Chris Millis and Claire Jones are the reporting officers. Again, this is a monitoring report and for noting, but over to Chris to start, I assume, and then Claire will come in with the information. Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Claire and I are here to answer any questions that may not be contained in the data that's been presented or in the narrative that goes below it. So we're just happy to take any questions if there are any, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And Claire, you don't want to add anything before questions? You're happy to go straight to questions, Claire?
More than happy to go straight to questions, Chair. Thank you.
There we are. Thank you for that. First indication at the pre-briefing was Councillor Sean Percy, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've got a question in relation to one of the performance indicators, which is about the underperformance of the community drug and alcohol team at the moment, particularly on this document. So it says it's been addressed with the health board who are awaiting the outcome of their internal review. So I just wanted perhaps a little bit more insight in maybe the scale of the waiting lists there and what the time scale is for this review and just what our expectations are to see the improvement in that service. So just a little bit more information if that's possible. Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Claire,
Thank you.
Mark, Chris, you want to come in first?
No, Claire's going to take this one. We expected a question on this, Chair.
There we are. I thought so. Over to you then, Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Community Drug and Alcohol team in Neath and Talbot traditionally there was no waiting list in Neath and Talbot, but because of pressures on the service, including a number of vacancies and sickness, there has been an increase in the waiting list, and from memory, I would have to double check through an email, but I can give you the exact figure. From memory, it's about 40 people on the waiting list, but some people can be waiting a number of weeks, and I can circulate the most up-to-date figures after this meeting from our monitoring officer. We have a number of concerns about that and recently met with the health board. In fact, we met with them yesterday, and they have confirmed that all of the vacancies will be advertised. So are out for adverts. So hopefully any of those vacancies, if they get filled, should then see a reduction in the waiting list. We've also raised obviously about sickness absence, and as they quite rightly say, that's for them to manage, but we have flagged up the impact on the service. So we have tried to we have met with the health board to address these service pressures, and hopefully, and as I said, hopefully with the post being filled, we should now see an improvement. In terms of the review, that is a review the health board are undertaking and not one my team are undertaking. So I have very little information about that review, beyond that they said that it would be finished by the end of September, which was yesterday. And therefore, I look forward to seeing the outcome of that review to see what, if any, recommendations they make. So apologies, I don't have that information. That's not been shared with me. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Percy?
Sean?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Yeah, that's certainly given me a bit more insight into what's sort of been going on there. I think that there's a couple of little things perhaps I'd want to follow up, and one is in terms of the waiting list at the moment. Is that increasing, or is that just a backlog that is just sitting there? I'm just trying to get a picture of whether that situation is kind of static or getting worse. Obviously, in terms of timescales for recruiting staff, it seems to be a struggle for everybody at the minute, doesn't it? So a specific question there.
Yeah,
I think
we will continue.
Wait a minute, Claire. Hold on.
No, sorry,
Sean,
but just a second point, I guess, on that on the health board's kind of review side of things. I think obviously that's obviously now imminent, isn't it, for us to get some response on that, and I think we'd appreciate an update on that in due course as well. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Claire, do you want to come back on that point specifically?
Sorry, Chair, it was the Penderyn time lag kicked in just then. My apologies for that. I think I must be in a different time zone. Yeah, the waiting list we continue to monitor. We within the commissioning and development team, we have an excellent monitoring and commissioning officer who does quarterly monitoring with all of the services that we commission, and actually when we don't commission, but and so she will have take careful note of the waiting lists and their efforts to recruit and manage sickness. And that's how this has indeed been escalated. So it's my understanding that the waiting list has got worse and continues to get worse. We can hope it gets better, but we will be keeping a very close eye on it, Chair.
Thank you, Claire.
Chair.
Sean, all right? Before I bring you in, Chris, let's see if Sean's okay with that response. You can add, I'm sure. Sean, you all right with Claire's response? I think he's gone off, maybe. Right, Chris, yeah, come in.
No, Chair, I was just going to add that if we have any monitoring figures, we will send them round via Charlotte to this group.
Excellent. And funny enough, that's what I was going to ask Claire and yourself to do. Any update information on that question and for the committee to be well aware of, we'd appreciate that. I think Sean has dropped out. When he comes back, then I'll see what he has to say. Moving on, though, Councillor Dean Causey, have you still got a question that you mentioned at the pre-briefing?
Yes. Yes, please. Thanks, Chair. It's just it's a question on the KPIs. Obviously, we were going to expect the KPIs to be affected over the last 18 months, but so I'm going to question about the detail of that. But on the first one regarding the IDVA stuff and the percentage of repeat victims, in the commentary box it says during the COVID-19 pandemic there was a significant increase in disclosures of domestic abuse across all services, and this was widely anticipated, of course. But then it says many of our repeat victims were not in contact during this time. However, repeat victims accident service have now increased. Did we ever find out? Do we have any information on why repeat victims just dropped out of the service at that point, or am I reading too much into it, or was it not actually a thing, or so any sort of information on that, really? Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Claire.
Claire, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. That is a really interesting question, and we were asking ourselves that during the pandemic, because what we were seeing is a lot of new cases coming in and a lot of new referrals coming in, and them coming in at a level of violence that perhaps we hadn't seen before. So so in some respects, then we were getting new people into the service, and that's why we promote the service as much as possible so that people know where to get the help and know where they can come to us. So yeah, we were puzzling around why we weren't seeing the repeat victims, and it is something that we would like to do some work on around repeat victims more generally, because the PI is red because we've seen more people than we've anticipated seeing. So it's a positive in that people have come forward for help, but it's a negative in that you think, well, if they've been through the service once, perhaps they shouldn't need the help again. So we need to understand a couple of things: why repeat victims didn't come to the service during COVID, and also why people feel the need to present again. What can we do differently or better? At the minute, we haven't been able to dedicate any resource to that piece of work because we are just full on responding to the cases. We've seen a big increase, and I know we've had additional resources, but it is a piece of work we desperately want to do, and as soon as we can do it, we will do it. And of course, we'll bring that back here, because I think it will be of interest to members of this committee more generally. It is a difficult thing to ask. And maybe we didn't see the repeat victims because of, for example, in lockdown, maybe they weren't living with their partners, or they weren't having access to their partners, or their partners weren't able to travel to them. So there could be practical things around the lockdown that were the reason that they didn't contact us. But I agree, we do need to understand more. We just need some breathing space to be able to do that piece of work.
Thank you, Claire. Chris, please, just to add.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The other thing on this one is a repeat victim, it isn't always the same perpetrator. So we have to get that detail as well. It can be that they're being a victim from a different person or a new person, and they have moved partners rather than the partner has moved. So it's something that we need to look into. But during lockdown, they may not have felt that they could contact us because partners were together 24/7. So they may not have had the space to actually come onto a line and report to us and feel confident that they could speak to us without being overheard, for example. So that we have to look into it, Councillor Causey.
Thank you for that, Chris. Dean, are you happy with that response?
Very happy, thanks, Chair. I mean, you know, it's just something that caught my eye, and the observations have been made by both Claire and Chris are interesting, food for thought, and I obviously completely understand the difficulties that you've faced in terms of digging a bit deeper into this scenario. But yeah, as the information becomes gathered over the next few months, it'll be interesting to unpick some of that. Thanks very much, both. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Before I move on to Councillor Sheila Penry, Sean, you dropped out. Had you finished, and did you have the responses that you were looking for, or not so much looking for then? Are you happy with the responses that you've received?
Yes, Chair. I heard the vast majority of Claire's response, and I think I got what she was getting at. So that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Councillor Sheila Penry, then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I fully endorse what the last two speakers have said. As myself, I was concerned when I saw all the red alerts. But saying that, we know the pressure our staff has been under through COVID. And is there anything we as councillors could do to help? Thank you, Chair.
Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Penry. The two PIs that are read in respect of the IDVA service are read because we have seen more people than we thought we would have seen. So in some respects, that's actually a positive, because we've seen lots of people who've come forward for help, and we have had the additional resources. I think it's a target, because in an ideal world, you wouldn't want people to need our services, and you wouldn't want people to repeat. And that's why the target is framed the way it is. But conversely, we've seen more people, and we continue to promote our service to see more people. And I know members of this committee promote our work incredibly well. Additionally, so at this point, Councillor Penry, other than continuing to promote the services that are on offer and the whole agenda around voucher SV, I can't think of there being anything else. As I said, we've had additional resources, but I think it is an important point, and you know, to emphasise it is because we've seen lots more people.
Thank you, Claire. Sheila, all right? Any other member? I don't see no hands up. Just a very quick one from me then, Claire. I'm sure the members have covered the points that I would have highlighted or raised. I've never been a fan of the traffic light system, because, as you quite rightly just said, you've identified information that they don't see. Obviously, the capacity and resources, again, will always play a major part in all council work, and especially in this particular incident. You said higher numbers, and therefore you're dealing with more, which is a good thing, which is a positive. However, because of that, the figures will be construed in a way that it'll be a red indicator. So I think I've said it loads of times over the years, we need to relook at the way we sort of give information out, or change it in a way to show the actual thing, what's happening. I will touch on something, though, that we really need to be mindful. I'm passionate and a bit of a pioneer about violence, domestic violence in our communities, and COVID has most certainly highlighted it and put the figures through the roof. We're not actually seeing the real figures either. because I'm well aware that many domestic abuse incidents are not reported. We need to encourage these to be reported, irrespective of the resources or capacity we have to deal with them, because that's key. We cannot allow domestic abuse to continue in the home. And, you know, I would urge those neighbours and councillors and anybody who are aware of it to please report it to the 101 system and let it feed into this authority's workload. I make no apology, sorry, for trying to put further capacity or look at resources for you. I'm sure we would have to deal with them as and when they happen. But it is important. You're doing amazing work, as I keep saying, and I will always continue to say, but we mustn't lose sight of dealing with domestic abuse in its entirety as and when it's happening, and all other abuse really, but it's in the report today. So I just wanted to highlight that point. I see the Deputy Leader has a hand up, but I'll come to you first, Claire, because I think Leanne's going to be more broader on the work of the authority. But I'll come to you first, Claire, for a response to those questions. Thank you. You're on mute. Right, yeah.
You think we'd be used to it by now? We do a lot of work in promoting the services and availability of support. So you make a very valid point, Councillor Hunt, and we will continue to do that and look at new ways to get the message out there as well. So yeah, I'm very much appreciative of the support that I will feed back. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. Leanne, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You have raised a valuable point here. Domestic abuse is an important factor in some of the work that we do across Neath Talbot, not only to women, but to men as well. As you know, that I chair the Vowder SV as well, and all partnership work is ongoing, and I will feed this back in. It is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month this month as well, so obviously there'll be more messages going out by providers as well, but it is getting that message out to report things, as little or as small as you think they are, report them, and there's always help available from our providers, whether Thrive, Callan, DVS, etc. So it is very much important work that this authority is undertaking. So appreciate the comments from the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. There we are. Right. I see no further hands. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this report is a monitoring report and is for noting. So I'll move on to item 8, which is the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme. This forward programme is attached for information. It's on pages 29 to 32 for members to note. You members will be aware we had a workshop quite recently, and in the papers today is a heavy schedule as for the forward work programme for this committee. But I will hand over to Charlotte, because that we always use our officers for this report as well in democratic services. Over to you, Charlotte, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So yeah, you summarised it very well, thank you. The report, the forward work programme is there for noting. I'm aware that obviously you've had your workshop recently and you've populated your agendas for the next couple of months. But obviously if there's any amendments or any additions that you wanted to add, then you can obviously email us in directly, and we can make those amendments as a committee. And that's it really, Chair. Thank
you, Charlotte. Thank you for that. That will take me quickly on to the last item. Any urgent items? I have none. I'd just like to finish with thanking everybody, officers, cabinet member, deputy leader, those here today. I think this has been a very productive meeting. Thank you for all the presentations. A lot of issues were raised, and I'm sure together we will deal with them as Neath Talbot Council. But I thank you for your attendance, and I wish you all a lovely weekend. I hope the sun is shining for us all who enjoy outdoor sports, and so thank you again, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Chair.
Ta-ra, everybody.